Hey, you guys. As a Gen Xer who grew up on television and who is obviously still obsessed with retro pop culture, one of the most difficult things to grapple with when it comes to these classic shows and the stars we grew up watching is that things were often going on behind the scenes of many of these shows that were just simply awful. Recent documentaries and autobiographies have revealed some insanely dark stuff about the goings on at Nickelodeon and Disney Channel dating back to at least the 90s. We all watched our favorite 80s TV dad get convicted of some terrible crimes and go to prison. And we've witnessed so many child stars go off the deep end and lose their life at a young age that this outcome essentially became the rule and not the exception. The reality is that there are some dark and heartbreaking stories behind our favorite TV shows, and that's what today's video is all about. I'm going to take off my rose colored nostalgia glasses and talk about some of the worst things that have happened behind the scenes of my favorite shows. From heartbreaking stories of personal struggles to the most evil acts imaginable. This video is not going to be an easy watch. But instead of sensationalizing or giving these stories the tabloid treatment, my goal here is to make sure that these people and their stories are not forgotten, because every story that I share in this video is about someone with amazing talent who has entertained me and put a smile on my face at some point in my life, and they deserve to be talked about and remembered. My name is Natalie. This is my so-called Gen X life, and these are 15 of the darkest and most heartbreaking behind-the-scenes stories from our favorite TV shows. For an entire cohort of the youngest baby boomers and oldest Gen Xers born in the 1960s, Anissa Jones was the bright-eyed, pigtailed little girl who played Buffy on Family Affair. She was the kind of child star that networks dream of, adorable, talented, and completely unforgettable. But behind the perfectly curated TV image was a young girl struggling with the dark side of fame, a struggle that would ultimately lead to one of the most tragic endings in Hollywood history. Anissa's rise to fame was swift. Born in 1958, she landed the role of Buffy at just 6 years old. For 5 seasons, Family Affair was a television staple, and her character's doll, Mrs. Beasley, became a must have toy for kids across the country. Anissa's name and likeness was absolutely plastered on everything, from lunchboxes to coloring books. She even had her own clothing line. But while the show was a massive success, Anissa was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the role that made her famous. By the time she was a preteen, she was already trying to shed the image of Buffy. She didn't want to be seen as the cute little girl forever. She wanted to grow up, to be taken seriously. Hollywood, however, wasn't interested in Anissa Jones, the young woman. They only wanted Buffy. When Family Affair was canceled in 1971, Anissa was just 13 years old. The show's ending should have been her fresh start, her chance to break away from child stardom and explore new opportunities. But instead, she found herself trapped. She auditioned for films like The Exorcist, but casting directors couldn't see past her wholesome image. She turned down other TV roles, desperate to avoid being typecast. But the offers dried up, and the industry that once adored her had nothing left to give. Without a career to focus on, Anissa drifted. Her home life was in turmoil. Her parents' bitter divorce had left scars, and after a custody battle, she lived with her father until his death. As a teenager, she rebelled, hanging out with a rough crowd, shoplifting and experimenting with drugs. When she turned 18 in March of 1976, Anissa inherited the money she had earned from Family Affair, around $200,000, a fortune for a teenager. That would be the equivalent of about $1.1 million today. But instead of providing her with security, it fueled her self destruction. The money vanished in just a few short months, spent on a lifestyle that was spiraling out of control. On August 28, 1976, Anissa Jones attended a party in Oceanside, California with her boyfriend and friends, but she never left. The 18-year-old was found dead the next morning from an overdose of cocaine, PCP, Seconal, and Quaaludes. The coroner later called it one of the most massive overdoses he had ever recorded. Her death was ruled accidental, a tragic end to a life that had been filled with promise just a few years before. Tragically, Anissa Jones wasn't the only Family Affair cast member to suffer an untimely death. The show's two main stars, Sebastian Cabot and Brian Keith, also died young. Cabot died of a stroke in 1977, and Keith died by suicide in 1997. But it was the loss of Anissa Jones that was a harsh reminder of the dangers child stars often face. When the camera stopped rolling, there was no support system, no guidance, no one to help her navigate a world that had used her up and then discarded her. While we remember her as a sweet little girl on Family Affair, Anissa's real story is one of struggle, and one that should never be forgotten. Hogan's Heroes was one of those shows that shouldn't have worked on paper. A light-hearted sitcom about a World War II POW camp? Yeah, that's a tough sell. But thanks to Bob Crane's quick wit and undeniable charm, it became a hit. For 6 seasons, Crane played Colonel Hogan, the fast-talking, effortlessly cool mastermind who always stayed one step ahead of the bumbling German guards. But while Crane was making America laugh, his real life was unraveling into something far darker. Before Hogan's Heroes, Crane was already a star, just in a different medium. He was a hugely popular Los Angeles radio DJ, known for his razor-sharp humor and celebrity interviews. This gig opened doors to acting, leading to guest roles on The Donna Reed Show and The Dick Van Dyke Show. Then in 1965, he landed Hogan's Heroes, and that's when everything changed. But while America saw a charming leading man, behind the scenes, Bob Crane was developing an obsession that would ultimately consume him. Crane was an early adopter of home video technology, not for making home movies of family vacations, though, for something much more private. He compulsively filmed his sexual encounters with numerous women, often with the help of his friend John Carpenter. No, not that John Carpenter, the horror director. I'm talking about John Carpenter, the regional sales manager for Sony. Carpenter provided Crane with state of the art video equipment, and in return, he got access to Crane's world. The two men would go out together, meet women, and document their encounters. Whether these women knew they were being recorded, well, that part remains a little bit murky. The actor's son Robert recalls that his father's dressing room at the time was, quote, porn central, where the star stored Polaroids, negatives, and X rated films. By the time Hogan's Heroes ended in 1971, Crane's career had already started to decline. He struggled to find meaningful roles, eventually turning to dinner theater to make ends meet. But by 1978, his lifestyle had caught up with him. On June 29th of that year, while staying in Scottsdale, Arizona for a theater production, Bob Crane was found bludgeoned to death in his apartment. The scene was brutal. His skull crushed, an electrical cord wrapped around his neck. And the murder weapon? It was never found. But police believed it may have been a camera tripod. Suspicion quickly fell on Carpenter. His rental car had blood traces that matched Crane's blood type, but this was the 1970s, and DNA testing wasn't really a thing. Investigators couldn't make a definitive connection, and with little hard evidence, no charges were filed. It wasn't until 1992, 14 years later, that Carpenter was finally put on trial for Crane's murder. But by then, crucial evidence had been lost, and witnesses' memories had faded. The jury acquitted him, and the case remains officially unsolved. John Carpenter continued to maintain his innocence until his death in 1998. In 2002, the film Autofocus, directed by Paul Schrader and starring Greg Kinnear as Bob Crane, was released, and it explored the actor's life and untimely murder. Based on the book The Murder of Bob Crane by Robert Graysmith, the film received critical acclaim, with Roger Ebert calling it brilliant. It depicted Crane as a wholesome, church-going family man who was gradually drawn into Hollywood's excesses after finding fame. His friendship with Carpenter, who was played by Willem Dafoe, introduced him to emerging home video technology, which fueled his descent into a world of strip clubs, sex addiction, and BDSM. But Crane's son Scotty challenged the film's portrayal in an October 2002 review, arguing that it distorted his father's life. He claimed that Crane attended church maybe 3 times in the last 12 years of his life: his baptism, his father's funeral, and his own funeral. Scotty also disputed the film's timeline, asserting that his father was a sex addict long before achieving stardom and may have begun filming his encounters as early as 1956. Additionally, he refuted the film's depiction of BDSM, stating that none of Crane's extensive home recordings contained that kind of material. And Schrader later admitted that those scenes were inspired by his own experiences. Either way, Bob Crane's story is one of Hollywood's most unsettling cautionary tales. A man who lived two lives, one as a beloved TV star and another as someone consumed by his own impulses. His murder remains an open ended mystery, feeding decades of speculation. Was it Carpenter? A jealous husband? Someone from his past with a grudge? We may never know, but one thing's for sure. For all the laughter he brought to television, Bob Crane's real life was no sitcom. Eight is Enough was a late 70s family drama that was supposed to be a lighthearted take on a real life columnist's experience raising 8 kids. But behind the scenes, the show's first season was marked by an unthinkable tragedy: the death of Diana Hyland, who played the Bradford matriarch Joan. Now, if you're a pop culture junkie like me, you probably know Diana Hyland more for her off screen romance than her acting. She was involved with none other than John Travolta. Yeah, that John Travolta, who was 18 years younger and in the middle of his stratospheric welcome back Cotter stardom. The two met in 1976 while filming The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, where, just to make things a little weird, she played his mother. While Travolta was a new young star, Hyland had already built a solid, if somewhat under the radar career by then. She was on Peyton Place, had Broadway cred with Paul Newman in Sweet Bird of Youth, and was poised for a TV comeback as the no-nonsense but loving mom on Eight is Enough. But when she got the job playing America's Perfect TV Mom, she was quietly in the middle of a battle that she wasn't going to win. Diana had been diagnosed with breast cancer in 1975. She had a mastectomy, did chemotherapy, and at least for a while thought she might beat it. When she was cast on Eight is Enough, the producers and network executives had no idea how sick she really was. Or maybe they did and they just didn't think it would progress so fast. Either way, she managed to film only 4 episodes before her health took a sudden turn for the worse. And here's where it gets a bit more heartbreaking. By the time Travolta was deep into filming Saturday Night Fever across the country, he had gotten the news. Hyland didn't have much time left. He hopped on a flight back to LA immediately, and in what has to be one of the most gut-wrenching moments of his life, he was there when she took her final breath. On March 27, 1977, Diana Hyland passed away at just 41 years old. John Travolta was devastated. In interviews, he called Diana the love of his life, saying he had never been in love before her. He even wore the white suit they had picked out together at her memorial. But if you've read any of Travolta's life story, you know this wouldn't be the last time he faced a tragedy like this. 4 decades later, he lost his wife, Kelly Preston, to breast cancer. Meanwhile, Eight is Enough had to scramble. Hyland's death was too sudden to address it in season 1, so the show just sort of kept going without Joan Bradford, never really acknowledging her absence. It wasn't until season 2 that they wrote in her death, and Tom Bradford, played by Dick Van Patten, was suddenly a widower. To fill the void, the show introduced Betty Buckley as Abby Abbott, who would eventually marry Tom and take over the maternal role in the Bradford household. But we gotta ask the big question: did the show handle it well? One minute we had a mom, and then poof, she was gone. No big emotional send off, no tearful goodbye, just a quiet rewrite. Given how quickly network TV moved in those days, maybe that was the only option. Or maybe, like a lot of things in Hollywood, it was just easier to move on than to dwell on the real life tragedy behind the scenes. Diana Hyland's death is one of those stories that just makes you pause. She wasn't a tabloid fixture. She didn't have a big dramatic Hollywood downfall. She was just someone whose life and career were cut short way too soon. Maybe that's why she's not remembered the way that she should be. There was a time when Thursday nights meant tuning in to watch a lovable alien from Ork make the world a little brighter. Robin Williams, in his rainbow suspenders and childlike wonder, had us believing in the impossible. But behind the rapid-fire jokes, boundless energy, and infectious grin was a man navigating the pressures of fame, expectations, and ultimately his own personal demons. By 1981, Mork and Mindy was in its 3rd season, and Robin Williams was one of the biggest stars on television. But with that level of fame, there comes a cost. And Robin, like so many before him, was starting to feel its weight. There's one episode in particular that offers a rare glimpse into his mind at the time. It's called Mork Meets Robin Williams, an episode that he personally pitched, and it wasn't just a fun gimmick where he played both himself and his beloved alien character. It was a carefully crafted message, one that revealed the tension he was feeling between the boundless joy of performing and the increasing exhaustion of constantly being on. In the episode, Robin plays himself as a comedian struggling to balance the relentless demands of fame. When Mindy asks how he keeps up with the whirlwind pace, his answer is heartbreakingly honest. He doesn't know how to say no. Not to friends, not to fans, not to anyone. And when Mindy gently suggests that maybe he's being taken advantage of and maybe if he would say no more often, he would have more time to himself, Robin responded with a quiet truth.
It also looks like you're probably taken advantage of a lot. You know, if you learn to say no, you'd probably have a lot more time to yourself.
Maybe that's the last thing I want.
At the time, many viewers probably saw this as a bit of self-deprecating humor, but in retrospect, it was something much deeper. A rare, vulnerable moment where Robin wasn't just playing a character. He was telling us exactly what he was going through. Fame can be intoxicating, but it can also be isolating. Robin had spent his childhood moving from place to place, struggling with shyness. Comedy became his refuge, his way to connect, and once he found his audience, he never wanted to lose them. The fear of disappointing people, of not being enough, drove him to push himself harder and harder. Even in that Mork and Mindy episode, the message was clear. Mork's final conversation with Orson is a stark reflection of Robin's own struggles. He talks about the price of fame, the loss of privacy, the expectations, the way everyone wants a piece of you until there's nothing left for yourself.
Isn't fame its own reward?
Oh, yes, sir, it is. But when you're a celebrity, everybody wants a piece of you, sir. Unless you can say no, there'll be no pieces left for yourself.
I thought all stars were rich, live in mansions, and drive big eggs.
I know, sir, that's the common misconception. But you see, to get that, you have to pay a very heavy price. You have responsibilities, anxieties, and, well, to be honest, sir, some of them can't take it.
In the years that followed, Robin continued to make us laugh, to inspire us, to bring immeasurable joy to millions. But privately, he continued to battle his own demons: drug and alcohol addiction, depression, and anxiety. But it turns out there was so much more to Robin's story. In 2014, after experiencing a troubling mix of paranoia, memory loss, and anxiety, Robin was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. But what he and even his doctors didn't know at the time was that he was actually suffering from an aggressive form of Lewy body dementia, a devastating neurological disease that stripped away his sense of self, his ability to think clearly, and ultimately, his will to go on. His wife, Susan, would later describe how the misdiagnosis meant that Robin never got the treatment he needed, and the world never got the chance to understand what was really happening to him. Robin Williams wasn't just a comedian. He was a light in the darkness, a reminder that joy and pain can exist in the same breath. When we look back at Mork and Mindy, it's easy to see only the laughter, the absurdity, the joy. But nestled in between the punchlines were quiet moments of truth, messages from a man who gave so much of himself to us that in the end, there wasn't anything left for him. If there's one thing we can take from his story, it's the lesson he tried to teach in that long forgotten episode: the importance of boundaries, of self care, of knowing when to say no, not just to others, but to the relentless expectations we place on ourselves. Because in the end, Robin Williams gave us more than just comedy, he gave us himself. And for that, we will always be grateful. Bill Bixby was a household name in the 1970s, the kind of TV star who brought warmth and sincerity to every role he played. Whether it was the charming reporter in My Favorite Martian, the devoted father in The Courtship of Eddie's Father, or the tragic fugitive in The Incredible Hulk, Bixby had a knack for making audiences believe in the characters he embodied. But behind the scenes of The Incredible Hulk, his personal life was marked by heartbreak and tragedy that rivaled any TV drama. Bixby's first marriage was to actress Brenda Benet. She was a familiar face on television, having appeared in shows like The Love Boat and Days of Our Lives. The two married in 1971 and welcomed their only child, Christopher Sean Bixby, on September 25th, 1974. For a time, they seemed to have the perfect family, but fame and the pressures of Hollywood took a toll on their relationship, and by the late 70s, their marriage was unraveling. In February of 1980, Benet made a guest appearance on The Incredible Hulk in an episode titled The Psychic. At the time, the couple knew their marriage was coming to an end, but they wanted to show their son that his parents still loved each other and could get along.
Goodbye, David.
You be good to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Later that year, they divorced, with Benet gaining primary custody of Christopher. But just a few weeks later, tragedy struck. On March 1st, 1981, during a weekend ski trip to Mammoth Lakes with his mother, 6-year-old Christopher fell ill with what seemed to be a minor throat infection. The illness, however, was far more serious than anyone realized. He was diagnosed with acute epiglottitis. I'm sorry if I don't say that right, but it's a rare and severe condition that causes swelling in the throat and blocking airflow. Doctors performed an emergency tracheotomy, but complications set in quick. Christopher went into cardiac arrest and slipped into a coma. Despite the surgeon's best efforts, the little boy never regained consciousness, and he passed away later that evening. The loss was devastating. Bixby, who had stayed behind in Los Angeles, was informed of his son's death over the phone. Friends and colleagues later described him as utterly shattered by the news. But the tragedy doesn't end there. Brenda Benet was inconsolable after Christopher's passing. Those close to her said that she was overcome with guilt and grief. The bright, ambitious actress who had fought her way through Hollywood's tough landscape now found herself in a depression that she couldn't escape. Barely a year after Christopher's death, on April 7th, 1982, Benet took her own life. She was just 36 years old. A close friend, actress Tammy Bruce, discovered her body in the bathroom of her Los Angeles home, where she had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Bixby somehow found the strength to carry on, channeling his grief into his work. After The Incredible Hulk was canceled, he transitioned into directing, working on sitcoms like Blossom, and he even found love again, marrying twice more. But fate had one more cruel twist in store. In 1991, Bixby was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Despite undergoing treatment, the disease spread aggressively. In his final years, Bixby still kept working, directing episodes of Blossom while undergoing chemotherapy. But by 1993, his health had deteriorated rapidly. On November 21st, 1993, Bill Bixby passed away at the age of 59. For millions of fans, Bill Bixby will always be remembered as the man who brought kindness and depth to television. But behind his charismatic on-screen presence lay a life of profound sorrow. The loss of his son, the suicide of his ex-wife, and his own battle with cancer make his story one of the most heartbreaking in Hollywood. Yet, despite the pain, Bixby never let his tragedies define him. He continued to entertain, to create, and to inspire. And in the end, perhaps that's his greatest legacy. Not just the roles he played, but the strength he showed in the face of unimaginable loss. Some stories stick with you long after you hear them, and I think this is one of them. This is the story of Dominique Dunne. Dominique was a promising young actress who was making her mark on television in the late 1970s and early 1980s, with guest appearances on hit shows like Family, Lou Grant, and Chips. She also had a recurring role in the TV series Breaking Away and was quickly becoming a familiar face on screen. But it was her role as Dana Freeling in 1982's Poltergeist that cemented her place in Hollywood. Tragically, she would never see the heights of the career she was destined for, because just weeks after the release of Poltergeist, her life was brutally cut short at just 22 years old. Her future was stolen when her ex-boyfriend, John Thomas Sweeney, attacked her outside of her home. Dominique's relationship with John Sweeney, a promising chef in the Los Angeles fine dining scene, began like many young romances, full of excitement and passion. They met at a party in 1981, and within weeks, they had moved in together. However, cracks soon appeared in the relationship. Friends and family noticed how possessive and jealous Sweeney became. He monitored her whereabouts, showed up uninvited to her work, and grew increasingly controlling. And then came the violent outbursts, explosive arguments, accusations, and physical abuse. In August 1982, the abuse escalated when Sweeney violently yanked Dominique by her hair during an argument, pulling out handfuls by the roots. She fled to her mother's house, but days later, Sweeney convinced her to return. A month later, he choked her so severely that a friend had to intervene. The bruises on Dominique's neck told the truth. Her life was in danger. Finally, she ended the relationship for good, had the locks changed on her house, and tried to move on. But Sweeney refused to let her go. On the night of October 30th, 1982, Dominique was at home rehearsing a scene with actor David Packer when Sweeney showed up at her door. She stepped outside to speak with him, but within minutes, their conversation turned violent. Packer heard screaming, followed by silence. When he called the police, they told him the disturbance was outside of their jurisdiction. By the time that help actually arrived, it was too late. Sweeney had strangled Dominique in her driveway, leaving her unconscious. 5 days later, she was taken off of life support. The trial that followed added further heartbreak to an already tragic case. Sweeney was charged with second-degree murder, but his defense argued that he acted in the heat of passion, claiming he, quote, just exploded when Dominique allegedly admitted she had misled him about reconciliation. The judge barred crucial evidence, testimony from Sweeney's ex-girlfriend, who detailed years of abuse at his hands. In the end, despite the evidence and the brutality of the crime, the jury convicted him of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter, not second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but served only 2.5 before being released on parole. Dominique's family was devastated, not just by her murder, but by the justice system's failure to hold her killer fully accountable. Her father, Dominique Dunne, a respected writer and journalist, spent the rest of his life advocating for his daughter and for victims' rights. Dominique Dunne was no stranger to Hollywood. He had worked in the industry for years before becoming a journalist. But after Dominique's death, he used his voice to shine a light on injustice. And when he found out that Sweeney had been released and was working as a chef at a well-known restaurant in Santa Monica, he knew he had to do something. Dominique and his family stood outside the restaurant, peacefully protesting and handing out flyers that read, quote, "The food you will eat tonight was cooked by the hands that killed Dominique Dunne." They wanted the world to know who Sweeney was and what he had done, and eventually their efforts worked. Sweeney quit and left Los Angeles. For years, Sweeney tried to stay under the radar, but in the mid-90s, a father in Florida made a shocking discovery. After reading one of Dominique's articles about Dominique's case, he realized that his own daughter was engaged to a man named John Sweeney. The pieces started to fall into place, and he feared the worst. The father reached out to Dominique, and Dominique confirmed those fears. It was the same man. Immediately, he contacted the woman and told her the truth about the man she was about to marry. And after that, Sweeney once again disappeared, this time changing his name to John Mara and relocating to the Pacific Northwest. Dominique never stopped searching for answers, though. He even hired a private investigator to track Sweeney's whereabouts and considered putting a hit out on him. But over time, he came to a realization. Holding on to his anger, that obsession with finding Sweeney was consuming him, and he eventually chose to let it go. He said that grief is a complicated thing. It doesn't just disappear. But Dominique found a way to turn his pain into something meaningful. He spent the rest of his life telling stories that needed to be told. His work became his legacy, and he gave a voice to those who had been silenced. And in doing so, he honored Dominique in the most powerful way possible. This story is heartbreaking, but it's also a reminder of the strength of a parent's love. Dominique Dunne never got the justice he hoped for, but he made sure that Dominique's story and so many others were heard, and that's something that will never be forgotten. Few tragic Hollywood stories hit as hard as the heartbreaking loss of Jon Erik Hexum. A young actor on the brink of stardom, Hexum had the looks, charm, and talent that made casting directors sit up and take notice. But in a moment of carelessness on the set of the TV show Cover Up, a promising career and a young life was cut short in an accident that still haunts Hollywood today. Born on November 5th, 1957 in New Jersey, Hexum was raised by his mother after his father left when he was just 4 years old. He pursued higher education at Michigan State University, where he studied biomedical engineering before shifting gears to drama. A natural athlete, he played football in college but found himself drawn to the performing arts. After graduation, he moved to New York City in 1980, determined to break into acting. Like so many hopefuls before him, he worked odd jobs, including house cleaning and driving taxis, to make ends meet. His big break came when he caught the attention of talent manager Bob Lamond, who had helped launch John Travolta's career. Encouraged to move to Los Angeles, Hexum took a shot at Hollywood, where he quickly found success. In 1982, Hexum landed his first major role as Phineas Fogg on Voyagers, a time travel adventure series that showcased his leading man potential. While the show struggled against 60 Minutes in the ratings and was canceled after just one season, an absolute crime, it put him on the map. Next came The Making of a Male Model, a TV movie where Hexum starred opposite Joan Collins. The role cemented his status as a Hollywood heartthrob, though he later expressed regret about the film's exploitative nature. Still, he continued working, appearing in Aaron Spelling's Hotel and landing a supporting role as a terminally ill quarterback named Pat Trammell in the feature film The Bear. Then came Cover Up, the CBS action series that was supposed to make him an A-list TV star, but it would prove to be his final project. Cast as Mac Harper, a Green Beret turned model who worked undercover for the CIA, Hexum seemed poised for his next big leap in Hollywood. But just 7 episodes into filming the first season, things took a tragic turn. On October 12th, 1984, while filming an episode of Cover Up on stage 18 of the 20th Century Fox lot, Hexum was in between scenes and found himself waiting through a long delay in production. Frustrated, he picked up the .44 Magnum revolver used in the scene, loaded it with a blank, and jokingly played Russian roulette. With a casual, tragic miscalculation, he held the gun to his temple and pulled the trigger.
Topping the news tonight, motion picture and television star Jon Erik Hexum is in critical condition tonight, a victim of a freak accident. Phil Schuman is standing by live at the Beverly Hills Medical Center. He has the latest for us. Phil?
Well, what happened is that Jon Erik Hexum accidentally wounded himself in the head when he fired a gun loaded with blanks on the set of his television series Close Up.
Although blanks don't fire bullets, they do release a powerful force. At close range, the explosion fractured Hexum's skull, sending a bone fragment deep into his brain. He was rushed to Beverly Hills Medical Center, where surgeons worked on him for 5 hours to save his life. But the damage was too great. After 6 days in a coma, Hexum was declared brain dead on October 18, 1984. At just 26 years old, Hexum's life was over, but his legacy continued in a profound way. His mother made the courageous decision to donate his organs, helping at least 5 people, including a 5-year-old boy and a 36-year-old heart transplant recipient. His corneas, kidneys, and even skin grafts saved lives, making his tragic end a story of both loss and hope. Following his death, Cover Up continued for the rest of the season, with Anthony Hamilton stepping into the role of a new agent. The show, however, never fully recovered from the tragedy and was ultimately canceled after just 1 season. Hexum's accident served as a sobering reminder of the dangers of firearms on sets. Nearly a decade later, Brandon Lee would lose his life in a similar incident while filming The Crow. Hexum's death led to increased awareness of firearm safety in Hollywood, though accidents still happen today. Decades later, Jon Erik Hexum remains a what could have been story, a young man with endless potential, taken far too soon by a moment of thoughtless misjudgment. He may not have had the long career he deserved, but his brief time in the spotlight still resonates with fans who remember his talent, charm, and the tragic lesson his story left behind. This is the story of Dana Plato, a child star beloved by millions. She had it all: fame, talent, and a role on one of TV's most iconic sitcoms. But behind the smile, Dana struggled with demons that would ultimately lead to a tragic ending. From an early age, Dana's life was far from ordinary. Born to a teenage mother and adopted as an infant, she grew up in the San Fernando Valley, excelling in figure skating before landing commercials and TV roles. Then came Different Strokes, the show that made her a household name. For 6 seasons, Dana played Kimberly Drummond, the sweet, caring older sister to Willis and Arnold. The sitcom became massively successful, making stars of its young actors: Plato, Gary Coleman, and Todd Bridges, who also has a tragic backstory. But with instant success came the dangers of Hollywood excess, and Plato began experimenting with alcohol, marijuana, and cocaine alongside her young co-stars. Things got so bad so fast that Dana experienced an overdose at the age of 14. Navigating the tide of success and adulation without any healthy coping mechanisms soon spelled trouble for the young Plato. In 1983, she moved in with her future husband, guitarist Lanny Lambert, and she became pregnant around the age of 19. Because of this, Plato was written out of Different Strokes. According to USA Today, the producers worried that Plato's personal life ruined the wholesomeness of her character and the squeaky clean image of the show. And just like that, she was dismissed from her starring role. Dana did have the opportunity to return on the show's final seasons as a recurring guest star.
How could you do that? How could you go to somebody behind my back? Well, that's horrible. I wish I had never come home from Europe. I hate this family.
But in the years following the birth of her son Tyler, she struggled to find other roles that would establish her as a serious actress. Before long, Plato was settling for B movies and adult films as a way to make money. She did break some ground by becoming the first actor to star in a video game, but nothing else really mattered. The softcore pornography did get some press. None of it reunited her career. Dana found that Hollywood had little interest in her once she was no longer a fresh-faced teen. To make matters worse, behind the scenes, Dana was spiraling with her substance abuse. In 1991, Dana made headlines for all the wrong reasons when she was arrested for robbing a video store in Las Vegas with a pellet gun. A judge sentenced her to probation, but just a year later, she was arrested again for forging a prescription for Valium. If you were around back then, you remember the jokes that were made about her in the press. It's just heartbreaking. By the late 90s, Dana was struggling to rebuild her life. And on May 7th, 1999, she made her final public appearance on The Howard Stern Show, hoping to prove to the world and herself that she was clean.
She's trying to resurrect her career.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Trying to make some money again.
No, excuse
There's
me.
nothing wrong with that if you're honest.
I'm honest. I am a drug addict, alcoholic. I am always in recovering. Okay,
Right.
I am recovering. Alcoholic,
You're an
drug addict.
alcoholic, ex-con, lesbian with mental health problems.
I want to tell Dana, I'm also recovering, and I believe in you. I believe everything you said.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much.
That's not a problem at all. And Howard, if she starts to cry, I'm sure you can console her.
Well, I like that. She did start to cry again.
Thank you.
No onions in the studio, huh?
And you're really hurting, huh? I mean, that you break out into tears so quickly.
It hurts, Howard.
I'm
When you're
tired,
recovering.
man.
You're tired.
I'm just tired.
You're tired of the whole thing.
I'm tired of defending my character everywhere I go.
Did you ever consider suicide at one point?
Oh, hell no.
You never did. Never got that
I
bad.
got a beautiful boy, no.
Right, you would never do that.
I'm okay in my skin, you know?
Right.
I'm okay with who I am.
You feel good.
She said, "I'm tired of defending my character. My life is so good now. I've never been happier." But not everyone believed her. Callers accused her of lying about her sobriety, and the interview became an uncomfortable spectacle. Stern and his crew were awful, absolutely disgusting to her. And honestly, it makes me furious listening to the audio. Because the very next day after her appearance on Stern, on May 8th, 1999, Dana was found dead in her motorhome from an overdose of painkillers and muscle relaxers. She was only 34. Though initially considered an accident, her death was later ruled a suicide. The bright-eyed young actress who once lit up millions of TV screens was gone. Tragically, the story didn't end there. 10 years later, on May 6, 2009, Dana's son Tyler died by suicide at the age of 25. He had struggled with the same demons that haunted his mother. Dana Plato was more than just a child star. She was a mother, a fighter, and a woman trying to find her place in a world that often seemed determined to cast her aside. Judith Barsi was a rising star in the mid to late 1980s until her life was stolen in one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking and gruesome tragedies. This is the devastating true story of a young girl whose dreams were cut short by the very person who should have protected her the most, her own father. I need to give you a little bit of a warning here. This is an incredibly difficult story to listen to. Born on June 6, 1978 in Los Angeles, Judith Barsi was the daughter of Hungarian immigrants Maria and Joseph Barsi. From the very beginning, her mother was determined that Judith would be a star. At the age of 5, she was discovered at an ice skating rink, and within a year, she was booking commercials. Her first acting role was in the memorable miniseries Fatal Vision, and then she started popping up everywhere on TV. She appeared in Knots Landing, The Twilight Zone, Remington Steele, Trapper John M.D., St. Elsewhere, Growing Pains, just to name a few of her many credits. At 10 years old, Judith was incredibly petite, only 3 feet 8 inches, so she was often cast as a much younger child. Her voice was bright, full of life, and unmistakable. Judith was adored by casting directors, quickly becoming a go-to child actress, and not just on TV. She also made the jump to movies, and by the time she was in 4th grade, Judith was making an estimated $100,000 a year, enough to buy her family a home in the West Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. From the outside, her life seemed like a Hollywood fairy tale, but behind closed doors, Judith's world was anything but magical. Judith's father, Joseph, was a plumber, known to his friends as Arizona Joe because he had lived in Arizona when he first immigrated to the United States. He had a troubled past, reportedly growing up in a rough part of Hungary before immigrating to the U.S., and he was a drinker, a man with a temper, and someone who could fly into a rage at the smallest provocation. At first, he was proud of his daughter's success, but as Judith's star rose, his demons started to consume him. He was arrested multiple times for drunk driving, and his jealousy and paranoia grew. He reportedly bragged to his friends that he was in control of his daughter's success, yet at home, he terrorized his family. Joseph would scream at Maria, then threaten her life and tell her if she ever tried to leave, he'd kill her. But the worst part, he made the same threats to Judith. Before leaving to film Jaws: The Revenge in the Bahamas, Joseph reportedly held a knife to Judith's throat and told her, "If you don't come back, I will kill you." When she returned, things only got worse. She started pulling out her eyelashes, and she plucked her cat's whiskers. These were textbook signs of extreme emotional distress. But her mother, despite her growing fear, stayed. Friends begged Maria to take Judith and leave, and she tried. She even rented an apartment as a safe haven, but Joseph manipulated her and convinced her to stay. And tragically, social services who were contacted after a child psychologist identified Judith as a victim of abuse closed the case when Maria reassured them that she had a plan to leave. In the summer of 1988, Judith had just completed voice work for All Dogs Go to Heaven. She was supposed to attend an audition at Hanna-Barbera, but she never showed up. Her agent, Ruth Hansen, called the house, and Joseph picked up. He told her that Maria and Judith had been taken to San Diego by a big black car. That was a lie. On July 25th, 1988, in the early morning hours, Joseph Barsi followed through on his threats. He shot Maria in the hallway of their home. Then he walked into Judith's bedroom where she was sleeping in her canopy bed. He shot his 10-year-old daughter in the head. And 2 days later, as their bodies lay in the house, he poured gasoline over them and set them on fire. And then he walked into the garage and turned the gun on himself. The neighbors smelled the smoke. One of them, Eunice Daly, heard the gunshot and called the police. When officers arrived, they found the charred remains of Judith and Maria inside the house. Joseph was dead in the garage from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Judith was 10 years old. She was laid to rest beside her mother, leaving behind a career that could have spanned decades. Hollywood lost a rising star, but more than that, a little girl lost the future that she deserved. And what makes it even more tragic is that it was preventable. Judith Barsi's story remains one of the darkest in Hollywood history. A reminder that no amount of fame or money can protect a child from the monsters lurking at home.
Charlie, will I ever see you again?
Sure. Sure you will, kid. You know, goodbyes aren't forever.
Then, goodbye, Charlie. I love you.
Yeah. I love you too.
In the midst of the Cold War, when tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were at an all-time high, a 10-year-old girl from Maine dared to ask a question that the world leaders could not ignore. Samantha Smith wasn't just a child. She became America's youngest ambassador for peace, capturing hearts across the globe. But her remarkable story was tragically cut short in an accident that some question to this day. The early 1980s were a time of great uncertainty. The world watched anxiously as the US and the Soviet Union stockpiled nuclear weapons, and fears of a devastating war loomed large. Amidst this tension, a young girl named Samantha Smith picked up a pen and wrote a letter to Soviet leader Yuri Andropov, asking him the one question on everyone's mind. Do you want war?
Mr. Yuri Andropov, the Kremlin, Moscow, USSR. That's only common sense. Dear Mr. Andropov, my name is Samantha Smith. I am 10 years old. Congratulations on your new job. Very, very smart of you to include that. I have been worrying about Russia and the United States getting into a nuclear war. Are you going to vote to have a war or not? If you aren't, please tell me how you're going to help to not have a war. This question you do not have to answer, but I would like to know why you want to conquer the world, or at least our country. God made the world for us to live together in peace and not to fight. It's my pleasure to present Samantha Smith.
Samantha's innocent yet profound words made an impact. Her letter was published in the Soviet newspaper Pravda, but she received no response. Undeterred, she wrote again, this time to the Soviet ambassador, asking if Andropov intended to answer. And then on April 26, 1983, an extraordinary thing happened. Samantha received a personal reply from Andropov himself. In his letter, the Soviet leader assured Samantha that the Soviet Union wanted peace and invited her to visit his country. What followed was a historic journey that captivated the world. Samantha and her family traveled to the Soviet Union, where she met with children, toured Moscow, and stayed at the famous Artek children's camp. She was embraced by the Soviet people, treated as an honored guest, and became a symbol of hope for a future free from war. Her message was simple. They're just like us. Back home in America, Samantha's fame continued to grow. She wrote a book about her experiences, Journey to the Soviet Union, and even hosted a Disney Channel special interviewing presidential candidates in 1984 about politics. Samantha's fame resulted in her becoming the subject of a stalker named Robert John Bardo, who actually traveled to Maine in an attempt to meet her. But he dropped his plans to get close to Samantha when he received a citation from the police. Bardo decided he was drawing way too much attention to himself, so he left Maine without getting near Samantha and returned home. He would later confess to finding new ways to stalk Samantha, and the only thing that stopped him from getting to her is another horrible tragedy, which I will be talking about in a minute. But I had to mention Bardo. because his name comes up again in this video. After Smith was no longer an option for him to be obsessed with, Bardo turned his attention to someone else. But let's get back to Samantha. In 1985, she capitalized on her peace activist fame and transitioned to entertainment by stepping into the world of acting, landing a role on the ABC drama Lime Street alongside veteran actor Robert Wagner. For Samantha, acting was a new adventure, while never losing sight of her passion for peace. But tragically, she would never see where her future might lead. On August 25, 1985, while returning home from filming Lime Street, Samantha and her father were aboard Bar Harbor Airlines Flight 1808. As the plane approached Lewiston-Auburn Municipal Airport in Maine, it crashed short of the runway, killing all 8 passengers and crew members on board. Samantha was 13 years old. Her sudden and tragic death sent shockwaves around the world. Conspiracy theories arose, especially in the Soviet Union, where some believed she had been silenced to prevent further diplomacy between the United States and the USSR. However, official reports cited poor weather conditions and pilot inexperience as the cause of the crash. Samantha had shot just 3 episodes of Lime Street plus the pilot at the time of her death, and the accident happened before any episodes had aired. Producers opted not to recast her role of Elizabeth, which was the daughter of Robert Wagner's character. Instead, they held auditions for another daughter character, but ultimately decided to drop that idea. The decision was made to have the character live off screen after episode 4 by moving her to Paris with her divorced mother. Lime Street was subsequently dedicated to Smith's memory, but the show failed to find an audience and it wasn't a hit with critics. After 8 episodes, Lime Street was canceled. Even in death, Samantha's impact endured. She was honored in both America and the Soviet Union as a symbol of peace. A Russian postage stamp bore her likeness, and a diamond was even named after her. Schools, monuments, and even an asteroid were dedicated to her memory. Samantha Smith's life was brief, but her legacy remains timeless. She showed the world that even the smallest voice can make a difference. In a time of war and division, she dared to dream of peace, and for that, she will never be forgotten. Rebecca Schaeffer's journey to Hollywood was one that many young actors dream of. Born in Eugene, Oregon, she was discovered while working as a department store model. With her striking beauty and natural charm, she quickly landed small roles in commercials and on television shows. But it was 1986 that changed everything. Rebecca was cast as Patty Russell in My Sister Sam, playing the lovable younger sister to Pam Dauber's character.
Hi, I'm Patty Russell, and this is my sister Sam. I just moved in. We haven't lived together since we were kids. I was raised by our aunt and uncle. Yeah, things sure have changed. I used to dress her. I can't wear this out in public. This makes up for the haircut you gave me when I was 3.
Audiences adored her. Rebecca was funny, relatable, and full of life. For a brief moment, it seemed like she had it all. A hit show, growing fame, and a bright future in Hollywood. But fame, as we've seen too many times, can attract the wrong kind of attention. Among Rebecca's fans was a man named Robert John Bardo. Yes, the same Robert John Bardo from the Samantha Smith story. But he wasn't just any fan, he was obsessed. He had watched My Sister Sam religiously, fixating on Rebecca as though she were a part of his own life.
And I had videotaped the show on VHS. I've had videotape parts of when she was on the CBS parade.
Good morning and welcome to Detroit. This little cutie pie next to me is Rebecca Schaeffer, seen as Patty Russell and My Sister Sam on CBS.
Hi, this handsome guy next to me is Joe Penny.
So she was with an actor, Joe Penny, and they were hosting the Thanksgiving parade for CBS.
For years, Bardo wrote Rebecca letters, attempted to visit her on set, and when that failed, he took more drastic measures.
Yeah, the Teresa Saldana case, I read about that in People magazine, and that's where I got the idea to hire the private investigator.
In 1989, Bardo hired a private investigator for $300 and got his hands on Rebecca's personal info. In those days, a home address could easily be obtained through the DMV. No security measures, no red tape. With this information in hand, Bardo traveled from Arizona to Los Angeles. On the morning of July 18, 1989, Rebecca was at home waiting for a script to be delivered for a major film audition, the role of Mary Corleone in Godfather Part 3. But when she answered a knock at the door, it wasn't the courier she was expecting. It was Robert John Bardo. She greeted him politely, but when he refused to leave, she grew uneasy and asked him to go. He did, but he came back. An hour later, he knocked again. This time, when Rebecca opened the door, he pulled out a gun and shot her in the chest. Her final words, spoken as she lay dying, were heartbreaking. Why? Why? Rebecca was just 21 years old. Hollywood was shaken. The senselessness of Rebecca's murder exposed the disturbing ease with which stalkers could gain access to their victims. But out of this tragedy, change was quickly set into motion. California passed laws restricting access to personal information through the DMV. Soon after, the first ever anti-stalking laws were enacted, setting a precedent for the entire country. The Los Angeles Police Department even created a specialized unit to handle stalking cases, a move that has since protected countless celebrities and everyday people alike. Though Rebecca Schaeffer's life was cut tragically short, her legacy endures. The laws that protect so many today exist because of her. But Rebecca wasn't a martyr. She was a young woman with dreams, ambitions, and a life that should have been lived to the fullest. Rebecca's story serves as a reminder of the darker side of fame, but more than that, it reminds us of the importance of protecting personal privacy and safety. And while her time in Hollywood was brief, the impact she left behind is undeniable. For many of us who grew up in the 1980s, Growing Pains was a staple of family television. It was a kind of show that felt safe, warm, and comforting, the sitcom that wrapped its life lessons in laughter. But behind the scenes, one of its young stars was fighting a silent and life-threatening battle, one that reflected the darker side of Hollywood's obsession with appearance. Tracey Gold, who played the intelligent and responsible Carol Seaver, should have been enjoying the success of a hit TV show. Instead, she was struggling under the weight of unrealistic beauty standards and cruel on-set jokes that chipped away at her self-esteem. Gold had already built an impressive career as a child actress when she landed the role of Carol in 1985. But as the seasons progressed, the writing on Growing Pains took a troubling turn. Her character became the target of relentless weight-related jokes, often at the hands of her on-screen brother Mike, played by Kirk Cameron.
It's an act, a cover.
Cover this.
Okay, it's beneath me to complain.
Anything beneath you.
One word from you, and you'll wish, as I do, that you had never been born.
But I thought that now that Mike's gone, it's your job to insult me. You got it, Jumbo. I mean, I don't mean to sound judgmental, but it makes you look like a pathetic dork.
At least I'm not hanging out with the girls from the office, seeing how much we can eat.
The showrunners defended the remarks, claiming they were just lighthearted sibling banter. But for Gold, they were anything but harmless. The jokes may have been written for Carol Seaver, but it was Tracey Gold who had to hear the laughter from the studio audience week after week. And when producers began pressuring her to lose weight, the damage escalated. By her late teens, Gold was placed on a dangerously restrictive diet, just 500 calories a day, under the supervision of a doctor. The response on set was immediate. She was showered with praise. Compliments poured in from cast and crew, reinforcing the destructive notion that thinness equaled worth. But the thing is, Gold was actually starving herself, both physically and emotionally, as her co-stars, the Growing Pains production team, and the audience watched in real time. Her weight loss was even woven into the Growing Pains storyline, with Carol Seaver being crowned homecoming queen, a moment that only deepened Gold's struggle. What was supposed to be a triumphant character arc became a cruel reflection of the pressure she was under, and the more she lost weight, the harder it became to stop. Eventually, her condition became impossible to ignore. Tracey had anorexia nervosa. At her lowest point, she weighed about 90 pounds. She had been clever when it came to hiding how thin she really was, wearing baggy clothes to cover up the extreme weight loss. But one day, her mom caught a glimpse at what was actually happening to her daughter. Her mother, horrified by seeing Tracey's skeletal frame, pleaded with her to seek help. The Growing Pains producers finally intervened and wrote her out of episodes so she could enter inpatient treatment. Gold's battle with anorexia reached its peak as Growing Pains neared its end in 1992. If you watch the series finale as the Seavers eat pizza in their living room, you can see that Tracey doesn't take a bite as her TV family chows down around her. She was in the depths of her disorder when the show was canceled, forcing her to confront her illness without the structure of a steady job. But rather than letting it define her, Gold took control of her story. She opened up publicly about her anorexia, gracing the cover of People magazine to share her experience. It was a groundbreaking moment, one of the first times a major television star had spoken so candidly about an eating disorder. Gold even starred in a made-for-TV movie loosely based on her story titled For the Love of Nancy, where fans could see the physical toll the anorexia had taken on her body. No more baggy clothes to cover things up. Throughout the 90s, the actress went through therapy and treatment to help her get back to a healthy weight and beat the disease that came close to taking her life. Gold later chronicled her journey in her memoir, Room to Grow, An Appetite for Life, and became an advocate for eating disorder awareness, helping others who face the same pressures she once did. Today, Gold's story serves as a source of inspiration. The entertainment industry has long been the home of unrealistic beauty standards, but her willingness to speak out helped push the conversation forward. The 90s heroin chic waif look with a side of eating disorder became a popular trend among teenage girls, and I remember it well back in high school and college. Gold's willingness to speak up and share her story was a big deal. She transformed her pain into a mission to help others, ensuring that her legacy extends far beyond the sitcom that made her famous. Tracey Gold's story is one of survival, resilience, and the enduring struggle against an industry that often values image over well-being. And while Growing Pains may have ended more than 3 decades ago, the lessons from her journey remain just as relevant today. For 11 seasons, Married with Children made audiences laugh with its sharp wit and over-the-top characters. But behind the scenes during the show's 6th season, things took a heartbreaking turn, one that forever changed the life of its leading actress, Katey Sagal. As the sharp-tongued and hilarious Peggy Bundy, Katey Sagal was a fan favorite. She was the glue that held that show together. So in 1991, when she became pregnant in real life, the show's producers decided to incorporate her pregnancy into the season 6 storyline instead of trying to hide her belly like most shows tend to do. The season 6 premiere shocked fans when both Peggy and Marcy announced that they were expecting, which fueled the comedy for many episodes to follow. Of course, in true Bundy fashion, Al was less than thrilled. The plotline provided plenty of laughs, but it was clear that the new Bundy and Darcy babies were going to change the dynamic of the show. But then suddenly, halfway through the season, Al wakes up from a dream and Peggy and Marcy are no longer pregnant, and Peggy disappears for a few episodes. It turns out that something devastating had happened off screen. 6 weeks before her pregnancy reached full term, Sagal suffered a late stillbirth. Her baby had died in the womb. Of course, she was heartbroken and devastated, and the producers made the compassionate decision to erase the pregnancy from the show's continuity. To avoid putting Sagal through further emotional distress, the show wrote off the pregnancy as the dream Al had been having. The storyline was suddenly dropped, leaving fans confused, but there was simply no other way to move forward without causing additional pain. They also gave Sagal as much time off as she needed to grieve her loss, which is why she ended up missing 4 episodes.
One of the more painful moments in the book, you speak about the stillbirth of your first child, Ruby.
Right.
And that loss and coping with it and how you actually blamed yourself.
Yes, it was a very difficult thing. I lost a child at almost 8 months, and I could not wrap my brain around. This is what they say about stillbirth, that 60% of it is God's will, and there's no medical reason. And that was what I was told. And I just couldn't let go of the control of somehow I had done something wrong. I was either sick and didn't know it, I had overworked, I had done something to lose this child, which I think as a mother, You know, that's what we feel. So it took me a year of like, I had trouble leaving the house. I went to all kinds of psychic healers and doctors and this, and it finally came to me through a Buddhist friend of mine that sometimes we have these little souls that come in and out and that their mission is completed. And that made sense to me because this little soul that came in actually did a lot of healing in the rest of my life.
The producers once again attempted to add a new child to the Bundy family in season 7, this time a distant cousin named Seven, but that didn't work out. Seven quietly disappeared without explanation and joined TV's long list of forgotten characters. Despite the tragedy, Katey Sagal persevered. She went on to have 2 more children, which producers opted to hide instead of writing into the storyline. And after Married with Children, she built an incredible career, starring in Futurama, 8 Simple Rules, and Sons of Anarchy. But she never forgot her lost child. She even channeled her grief into her music, writing the song You Can't Hurry the Harvest. The story of Katey Sagal's pregnancy and loss reminds us that even in comedy, real-life struggles can have a profound impact. While the Bundys kept us laughing behind the scenes, one of its stars endured one of life's greatest heartbreaks. Phil Hartman was a comedic genius, an actor, a writer, a voice artist, whose talent and charm made him one of the most beloved figures in television history. But behind the laughter was a troubled marriage that would ultimately end in a shocking tragedy. Born in 1948, Phil Hartman took an unconventional path to comedy. Originally a successful graphic designer, he found his true calling when he joined the Groundlings, an improv comedy troupe in Los Angeles. It was there that he honed his ability to transform into any character, a skill that would later make him an invaluable part of Saturday Night Live. From 1986 to 1994, Hartman was one of SNL's brightest stars. His ability to seamlessly shift between absurd characters and sharp political impressions set him apart. At the same time, he was voicing a number of memorable characters on The Simpsons. Then after SNL, he found new success as Bill McNeil on News Radio, a role that showcased his impeccable comedic timing. But away from the cameras, Phil's personal life was not as effortless. He had been married twice before, but it was his third marriage to Bryn Omdahl that would prove to be the most volatile. While Phil was known for his easygoing nature, Bryn struggled with insecurities, jealousy, and substance abuse. Their 10-year marriage was a cycle of passion and conflict, and Phil often withdrew from their fights rather than confront them. On May 28, 1998, the world awoke to devastating news. Phil Hartman had been murdered in his sleep by his wife Bryn, and then hours later, she took her own life. The details of that night are horrifying. After an argument, Bryn, under the influence of drugs and alcohol, retrieved a gun and shot Phil as he slept. She then drove to a friend's house, confessed, and returned home, where she ended her life as police arrived.
But when he finally decided to leave, she murdered him in his sleep. She shot him and then she shot herself. And my friend who was a cop was actually there when she shot herself.
So that happened when the police approached the house.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The police broke into the house to try to save the kids, and she shot herself. The kids ran away from their mom. How he was there, and they saw the mom in the bathroom with the gun. And the kids ran away from the mom when the cops broke down the door, because the cops saw her in the bathroom with the gun.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in murder-suicides, the mother will kill her children too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And so she was in there with the gun talking to the kids, and the kids freaked out. And then when they broke down the front door, the kids ran away from the mom, and she just blew her brains out.
Hollywood was left in mourning. His News Radio co-stars were devastated, and when you see Phil's final scene that he shot just days prior to his death, it makes the situation even more heartbreaking.
There you have it. Kind of a downer, huh? Especially with everyone dying and Matthew and I eating each other and all of that. But it's just a TV show. None of us really died. Right, gang? Right. Hey, where's Dave?
Oh, Dave drowned while we shot that last scene.
Oh, what about Vicky?
Off making a movie in Toronto.
Oh, okay. So only one person died, and one is off working on her feature film career, so it all evens out. Good night, everybody. Good night, folks.
SNL honored him with a moving tribute, and friends like Jon Lovitz and Steve Martin spoke of his immeasurable loss. Lovitz even went so far as to step into news radio as a new character to replace his good friend. But the greatest tragedy was that Phil's 2 young children were left without parents. Phil Hartman was more than a comedian. He was a once-in-a-generation talent, a devoted father, and a kind-hearted friend. His story is a heartbreaking reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the brightest smiles. But his legacy lives on in the characters he brought to life, the laughter he gave us, and the joy that he continues to bring to audiences. For 10 seasons, Matthew Perry made the world laugh as the quick-witted and lovable Chandler Bing on Friends. But behind the scenes, he was fighting a battle that few truly understood. His story is one of incredible talent, deep pain, and a relentless struggle with addiction, one that ultimately ended in tragedy. Matthew Perry was one of the biggest stars of the 1990s, but fame did not come without its cost. His struggles with substance abuse were no secret. He himself was open about the way his body told the story of his addiction. He once revealed that you could tell what he was using just by looking at him on an episode of Friends. In the episodes where he was heavier, he was drinking. If he was skinny, he was on pills. And if he had a goatee, he was taking a lot of pills. Matthew started drinking alcohol as a young teen when he was appearing in shows like Growing Pains, Charles in Charge, Second Chance, Highway to Heaven, Silver Spoons, Who's the Boss? But his battle with addiction began during the filming of Friends, and it was exacerbated by a 1997 jet ski accident on the set of his movie Fools Rush In, which led to a dependence on painkillers. At one point, he was taking up to 55 Vicodin pills a day. Despite multiple attempts at recovery, including over 15 rehab stays and an estimated $9 million spent on treatments, Perry found himself in a cycle of relapse and recovery. In his memoir, Perry detailed his experiences in high-end treatment centers across the globe, from Malibu to a secluded villa in Switzerland. He even underwent an experimental ketamine therapy that promised miraculous results, but in the end, the very drug meant to help him would contribute to his tragic demise. On October 28, 2023, Matthew Perry was found unresponsive in his hot tub at his Pacific Palisades home. The cause? Acute effects of ketamine. Despite his fortune, resources, and support system, Perry was ultimately unable to escape the grip of addiction. Investigators later discovered a network of enablers, shady doctors, drug dealers, and acquaintances who had helped him obtain ketamine outside of medical supervision. 5 people were arrested in connection with his overdose. Matthew Perry's story is one of many in Hollywood. Talented individuals lost to the pressures of fame and the devastating effects of substance abuse. But what makes his case especially heartbreaking is that the world literally watched him go through his battles each and every week for 10 years. He was open about his struggles, and he was a symbol of hope for so many battling addiction. He once even turned his Malibu home into a sober living facility to help others recover. He wanted to be remembered not just for his work, but for his advocacy. Perry once said, "The best thing about me is if an alcoholic or drug addict comes up to me and says, 'Will you help me?' I will always say yes." His death is a tragic reminder that addiction does not discriminate, no matter how much success, wealth, or love a person may have. Thank you for watching the darkest and most tragic behind-the-scenes stories from our favorite TV shows. If you made it this far, I truly appreciate it, and I know it wasn't easy. It's probably best to go watch a good 80s comedy now and decompress. As Dolly says in Still Magnolias, laughter through tears is my favorite emotion. And one more thing. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance abuse, domestic abuse, or thoughts of suicide, any kind of crisis, if things have gotten dark in your life, there are people out there who are available and willing to help. Here are some numbers to call if you need someone to talk to. Okay, bye.